In this section, I'm going to be talking about Jacques Derrida's structure assigned to play in the discourse of human sciences. Jacques Derrida is a deconstructionist who works to break down the structure that we base our lives on. To understand, we start with metaphysics, which is the search for what is ultimately real and outside of human senses. According to Plato, this would be the truth. We know the analogy of Plato's cave and shadows. What we see is not the truth, and it lies beyond our senses. Even education turns us away from the shadows because we are being taught what we believe and not finding the truth on our own. Metaphysics is an unchanging being of virtue, light, justice, and truth. The idea of the creator corresponds with metaphysics. The idea is that all structures have centers, like a car engine, a support beam of a building, or the center of a circle. Philosophically, God is at the center for the Puritans, but he is not Puritan, or the center. He is the center, and one cannot exist without one another. Throughout history, we replace one center for another. This could be truth for Plato, God for early Christians, rationality for Enlightenment, and so on. We like having a center because it curbs anxiety and it makes things easier to comprehend. In the late 19th century, we begin to question metaphysics and the center. We begin to think of the structure of the structure. This would be known as the event. After the event, there is no longer language, stability, or meaning or center. Instead, we have discourse, which is similar to text, and that it cannot be contained. Nature and culture are both deconstructing themselves and are not so opposite. For example, Levi-Strauss thinks about the idea that incest belongs to both nature and culture because some cultures interpret incest in different ways, while it is still biologically something humans turn away from. Americans typically don't date second or third cousins, while something in other cultures, they would date their second or third cousins, and that's normal for them. This also brings up the idea of ethnocentrism, which is the idea that one culture is better than the other because of the preconceptions that exist in their own societies. When the structure shakes, we respond by replacing one center for another, which would be discarding the old structure and beginning anew. Or we employ parts of the structure and realize that it is flawed. Derrida uses the reference of the bricolage to make his point about structure and the meaning of it. Bricolage is a skill of whatever is at hand, using whatever is at hand to create new things. So the bricoleur would be the person who employs tools around him to create something new. The engineer is the person who creates the task for the bricolage. The argument is that there would be no need for the engineer without the bricoleur, who probably created the engineer. Therefore, this discourse is decentered because the engineer is also a bricoleur, and since one cannot exist without the other. We have smaller discourses of theory because totalization does not exist. Totalization, hypothetically, would be the theory that can explain everything. This is useless and impossible. There are too many factors and an infinite number of substitutions, so therefore totalization is not something that can actually happen. Freeplay is the absence of a center and the idea that we create our own concepts. Race, gender, and sexuality is a construct. One does not exist without the other, but we create them. The idea that one thing does not exist without the other is known as relativism. For example, the able-bodied cannot identify as able-bodied unless a disabled body exists. Therefore, one is not better than the other because one does not exist without the other. The only way to respond to an idea of destroying a center is to despair or revel in supplementary and free play. Thank you.